Hey guys, Mr. Washington here. I am about to show you guys just a little tutorial on how to find the part given the percent and the whole. So the problem is 22% of 300 is what number? So the first thing we want to do is we want to figure out, what do we know? Well, we know that we have 22%. We also know that we have 300 is the total. %22 is of the total 300. So, after we figure out what we know, what do we need to know? We need to know what number represents this 22% of the whole. So we set up our proportion with what we know so that we can find what we need to know. Our proportion again is just two fractions set side by side equal to each other. And we are going to find equivalent proportions. So we ask ourselves, is 22% the part or is it the whole? 22% of the total would be the part, because if you took a test and you got all the questions correct, you would get 100%. That's the total of all percents. Every time you're talking about a percent, the whole would be 100%. So if I have 22%, I don't have the total or the whole, I have part of that 100%. So 22% will go in my numerator as my part. The numerator is the part and the denominator is the whole. Well, we said that if we took a test, we got all the questions right, we would get 100%. So 100% would be my whole, or the total. 300. If I'm taking 22% of 300, then that means that 300 is the total that I have, and I only want the part of 22% of that 300. So that means 300 would be our whole, which would go in our denominator. So 300 goes here, and we need to know the number that represents this 22%. So we don't know the part or the number that represents the 22%. So in this part, we're going to put in a variable x. Now that we have our proportion set up, we can go about finding our part, the number that represents 22% of 300. So the way we do that is, first thing, we have to turn this percent into a decimal. And the way we convert a percent into a decimal is we can do it two ways. We can divide 22% by 100, because if I look at the fraction, this fraction bar just means to divide. So if I read this would say 22% divided by 100. That would give me my decimal. Or I can do the shortcut. In any whole number, to the right of the ones place is my decimal. Even if I don't have anything to the right of the decimal. Usually with a whole number, if there's nothing to the right of the decimal, then that decimal doesn't have to be written. But it's understood that that decimal is there. So, because I'm dividing 22 by 100, that means I can move the decimal two decimal places to the left. Because when I divide, my number gets smaller. And so it's going to get smaller by 2 place values, because 100 has 2 zeros, 2 place values smaller than the whole number. So now I go from 22%, I can get rid of that percent sign, and now I have 22 hundredths. Once I've turned that decimal into a percent, that percent to a decimal, then I cross multiply. So I would end up with 300, and since I have a variable of x, a letter, in my problem, I'm going to change my notation for multiplication to this symbol here versus the x symbol we traditionally see with multiplication problems. So 300 times 22 hundredths is equal to 100x. Now, in algebra, we would want to get x by itself on the equal sign, on this side of the equal sign. But for this purpose, what we're going to do is we're going to focus here at 300 times 22 hundredths. Then once we're done solving that, we are going to convert that back to a whole number. So here's what we're going to do. First, we'll take our numbers and stack them. So I will have 300 and I will have 22 hundredths. Now, 22 hundredths is less than 1. So instead of stacking them with 22 hundredths directly under my 300, I'm going to move it over to the side to the right of my decimal in my problem so that I know that my place values are lined up correctly. And just so that I can visualize it and keep everything lined up, I'm going to add a decimal and 2 zeros here. This does not change the value of 300, but what it does is it allows me to keep everything aligned so that I can come out with the correct answer. So now I start with the 2 in the hundredths place, and I multiply it by everything up top. So anything times 0 is going to be 0. So that means I have 1, 2, 3, 4 zeros that I can go ahead and write right here. 2 times this 0 is 0. 2 times that 0 is 0. 2 times that 0 is 0. And 2 times the fourth 0 is 0. Now I can do 2 times 3. 2 times 3 would be 6. Then, whenever I move from the hundredths place over to the tenths place to multiply by everything, I have to add in a placeholder. And we like to call that placeholder 0 the hero, because it helps us save our space and keep our numbers aligned so that when we multiply, we have the correct answer. So after adding in 0 the hero, then I can multiply this 2 in the tenths place by everything up top. So I have 2 times 4 zeros, so I'm going to go ahead and write all 4 zeros there because I know anything times 0 is going to be 0. Then I have 2 times 3, which again is 6. And with any standard algorithm multiplication, which is just stacking it and multiplying it out by each place value, I'm going to then add everything after I finish going across the bottom. So now 0 plus 0 is 0, 0, 0, 0. 6 plus 0 is 6, and 6 plus nothing is 6. So now I have 660,000. But that doesn't make sense, because back in the problem it asks us 22% of 300. I can't have a number larger than 300 as a percent or part of 300. So now I have to go back to the problem, and when multiplying decimals, I have to look at how many numbers do I have to the right of my decimal in my problem. Now a lot of people will think, well, 0 doesn't count because it doesn't have a value. But 0 is a number. So if I count them, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 numbers to the right of my decimal in my problem. So that means I'm going to have 4 numbers to the right of my decimal in my answer. And remember, I said that with a whole number, just because there's not a decimal visible doesn't mean the decimal doesn't exist. So we know that it's directly to the right of the ones place. So my decimal, I'm going to go ahead and write it in, and I know I have to have 1, 2, 3, 4 numbers to the right of that decimal, so I'm going to move it 4 places to the left. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's where my decimal is going to go. So now when I look at this number, instead of 660,000, my actual answer is 66. So 22% of 300 equals 66. That's how you find the part.